I do want to dive in a little bit and talk about parental rights. But I actually want to take a step back to sort of this interesting trend that I see going on that I want to call the professionalization of child rearing. So I've got 3 kids, a 4-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And it's interesting as we've started diving into this, my wife and I, how when there's some topic that comes up, the question is always, well, who can we find to help with this? So we're starting piano lessons. So just this last week, rather than me sitting down at the piano with my child, what do? We've got a lady in the neighborhood that we take the kids to, and they teach them piano. When my oldest son wanted to play soccer, what do? We go sign up for soccer. Every time there's some challenge or new thing that I want to do with my child, that my child wants to do, I immediately seek out who is a professional that I can find to do that. And let's be honest, we're guilty of this in the church as well. And I point the finger at myself. Who is responsible for instructing our kids? Well, we start off with the nursery program, and then the children's program, and then they go into the youth program, and then they have a college and career. And it's this constant process. And again, my wife and I work with kids, with our 4- and 6-year-olds, and we've done interim youth pastor, but it's always this idea of, I as a parent am not equipped to raise my child. And so I go out into the world and find someone else to take that responsibility for me. And that leads us into this question about parental rights that I want to talk about. You see, I do believe there is a fundamental right to direct the raising of your child. In fact, the courts have recognized it. There's this great Supreme Court case from decades ago, back in the 1920s, dealing with this, the public school context. And the Supreme Court recognized that, yes, you as parents have a liberty interest, a guaranteed right to direct the upbringing and education of your children. And so they recognize that you as parents get to decide, what is my child going to be taught? How are they going to be instructed when it comes to matters of morality and religion? And even when it comes to a variety of other things, that you as parents have a pre-political right. It's not something that's found in the Constitution because it predates the Constitution. It's a God-given right. It is a fundamental liberty that you have over everyone else in the world to say, this is my child, and this is how I want them to be raised. But the challenge is, since this time, since the day, and this was way before any of us here were born, where you raise up a child, they go out on the farm with you, you work on the farm, the wife teaches sort of homemaking schools, everything happens at the home, all of the instruction happens at the home. But what have we done? We've started to sort of send that out to professionals. And so as a result, this very strong, well-established right that you have as parents, the courts have started rolling back and eroding and finding more and more ways to undermine your right as parents. Now, this has happened in lots of ways. We can look to the very start of sort of the public education system, which was some parents aren't able to train their kids at home, to provide them an education at home. So what do? We'll send them to common schools. Everyone will contribute. We'll put a schoolhouse in the community, and we'll send all the kids there. And then eventually, the government starts saying, well, we're seeing some parents aren't taking advantage of these schools, so we're going to pass mandatory attendance laws so that you have to send your child to a public school or have to certify that you're schooling them at home or a private school. So we start to see that erosion little by little. Then we start seeing it in more controversial contexts with them saying, well, kids have a right to get medical services. They have a right to go get an abortion, to get birth control, without you as a parent having the right to know or to give permission for your child to do that. And so we start to see that right erode more and more and more. And then we get in the context of what's happening in public schools and what you're experiencing here in California when you're starting to find out, wait a second, you taught my kid what today in school? You were teaching them that there's 70 different genders and that they ought to explore this, and you're teaching them at 5, 6, 7-year-olds about how reproduction works. And this is where we started to see courts go further and further and saying, yeah, we as the government know better than you as parents. We're the professionals, not you. And therefore we know best what your child needs to learn, not you. And this is where a lot of the battles happen, because a lot of parents will reach out to us and say, Matt, what can we do? How can we protect our rights in school? Don't we have a right to determine what our kids are taught? Don't we have a right to say, no, we don't want them to learn about that sexual topic. We don't want them to learn about this LGBT stuff. We want to have those conversations at home or in our church, not in a public school in a way that conflicts with our faith. Well, unfortunately, what the courts have done is to say, no, you do not have the right to be the exclusive provider of information about sexuality as it relates to your child. This case, this was the Palmdale School District case. This was from a few years ago. And it actually involved a teacher wanting to do a survey of some of the students in her class. And so a sort of very generic form was sent home with the parents that just said, hey, we're going to do a survey, ask your kids some questions, no big deal, let us know if that's okay. And like most parents, they see the permission slip come home and they say, yeah, sure, that sounds great. You can ask my kids some questions. Well, then a few days later, these kids start coming home to mom and dad and saying, hey, they were asking me about my sexual experiences, and they were asking me about my attractions, and what does this even mean, Dad? What does this even mean, Mom? Well, the parents were in an uproar, and so they immediately go to court and file a lawsuit and say, we did not want our kids to be exposed to these sexual topics at school. We did not know you were going to cover that. You didn't let us know. And it goes all the way to the court system, and the courts rule in favor of the schools. And they sadly say, well, too bad, because you made the decision to send your child to public school. And when you send them to school, once they cross that threshold, you give up your parental rights. In fact, here's how they worded it. While parents have a fundamental right to decide whether to send their child to a public school, they do not have a fundamental right to direct how a public school teaches their child. So let me break this down a little bit. I'm a visual guy, so what the court was essentially saying is, sure, you have fundamental parental rights, but basically the right is to decide, do you want your child to go to a public school? Do you want them to go to a private school? Or do you want them to be homeschooled? So when it comes to you've got the right to direct the education and upbringing of your child, direct means you get 3 choices, and once you make those choices, your rights end. Now let's specifically talk about this in the public school context, because how the courts look at it is they say, once you have made that decision to send your child to a public school, there's now a barrier, a wall placed up where your rights end. So this was what was going on in that Palmdale case I was talking about. The court said, you made the choice to send your child to that public school, and now that school is the expert. Now that school stands in place of you. And they get to decide what the child ought to be exposed to. They get to decide what topics are going to be covered and how they're going to be discussed. And you as a parent get no say, because we are putting up a wall that says, once you send them off to school, once they hop on that bus or you drop them off at the front door, your rights come to an end. Now let me take a little step back. I understand this a little bit, right? Because you could imagine a world where every parent gets to micromanage everything that's taught in a public school. And so every night they're going over the textbook. Well, I don't like you using this new math. I want to go back and I want you to teach my child using this math. And another parent says, well, no, I actually like this other way of learning math. We don't like calculators, so we want to go back to those like sliding roller systems, right? And so you've got a teacher saying, I've got 20 kids in my math class and 20 different ways they're wanting me to teach algebra. What am I supposed to do? So I'm a little sympathetic to too much micromanagement, okay? But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about topics of huge moral, religious significance to a lot of people. And we're talking about, can a school make a decision, not of we're going to teach math this way versus this way, but we're going to decide when and how your children are exposed to very controversial, very sensitive topics regarding sexuality and gender identity and pregnancy and abortion and all of this stuff. We are going to decide when and how they're exposed to it, not you. And to me, that is a very, very different question than micromanaging math. And this is why I don't like what the courts are doing in this area. Because when they put up that wall, they are now saying, you as a parent have no right to decide when and how your child is going to be exposed to those topics. And this is what we have to fight against. This is what you are facing day after day here in California as they're pushing more and more of this radical curriculum. But I want to give you a hope, because although the courts may not be the best way to challenge this right now, and I say that as an attorney, it breaks my heart, because my attorney part is like, how can I sue? Is there a way to sue? I think there's a way to sue here. Can I sue? Do any of you want to help me sue? That's what I do. I sue, okay? But I also recognize that there may be other vehicles and avenues. But that being said, we do want to sue. So if any of you are interested, talk to me afterwards in the booth. No, okay. Because the court also recognized that there is still an ability of parents to influence what is taught. And how that happens is through the legislature, through the local school boards. What the court said, our decision does not affect the right of parents to influence or change the conduct of school boards through all lawful means generally available to citizens of this nation. What does that mean? We have to mobilize and get engaged at the local level in our school boards, because it is those boards that are deciding when and how a lot of this curriculum is taught and how radical it's being. We have to get involved at the legislature, because it is the legislature that is passing laws like the California Healthy Youth Act and imposing this stuff. Because getting involved there and saying, no, you are not going to make this a requirement for schools. And getting involved at the local school board and saying, no, we are not going to include this topic and we are not going to include this. There is so much, even in the Healthy Youth Act, that is optional that we wrongly believe, well, the law says that it has to be taught. No. There are so many options, and we have to get involved with the school board so that the school boards are saying, you know what? We don't like this. This is not what our community stands for. This is not reflective of our values, and our kids are not going to be exposed to that. So there are ways to get involved and to help restore and knock down a little bit of that wall that the courts are trying to put up, and to get it where that wall is breached and where schools are saying more and more, no, we want you as parents to know what's going on. No, we want you as parents to help make decisions of when and how your child is exposed to these topics. What are the ways to do that? I want to talk about two in particular, and you're going to hear a lot about these today. Some of my other colleagues that are presenting are going to go into more details of what these look like. But two things I want to talk about is the idea of notifications and opt-outs. What are these? Well, notifications is essentially schools having a duty, an obligation, a requirement to notify you before they talk about certain topics, like sex ed, like health, like LGBT issues, of them giving you a warning and saying, hey, 2 weeks from now, we're going to discuss this subject in our health class. We want you as parents to know what's going on. We want you as parents to have the opportunity to come to the school, look at the curriculum, and then we couple that with an opt-out, with you as a parent saying, I'm going to decide that my child needs to be excused from that instruction. Now, you may be saying, well, Matt, this sounds great, but do we actually have the right to do that? Yes. And your rights are far broader than probably you realize. In fact, I want to talk about two sets of notifications and opt-outs that are currently available to you as parents under California state law. Let's first talk about sex education. So under the current California sex education law, and it has all of this stuff of comprehensive sex education and what must be taught, the law requires that before these topics are taught, you as a parent receive a notification that it's being taught. In other words, the school has to give you a fair warning that they are going to be discussing comprehensive sex education in your class, in your child's class. Have a statutory obligation to do so. And coupled with that is a right that you have as a parent to then opt your child out of those classes. So how it would work in practice is that usually at the beginning of the school year, whatever grade your child is in, you're going to get this form that says, your child is going to be subject to comprehensive sex education, these topics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you as a parent can respond and do a written notification, a letter. We've got forms out there that can help you with that to say, no, I do not want my child to receive that. You must dismiss them when those topics are discussed, because that is something we have decided we want to train our child about, not you, school. But I want to go to an even broader one that we're very excited about that we sort of stumbled across in the law. Several years ago, I think this was in the late 80s, there was a lot of sort of questions going on about health curriculum and so many other things, and this sort of developed through the 90s and the early years, and there was a very concerted effort by a specific legislator to reinsert some protections for parental rights. And so what they wrote into law is they said, any health topics that conflict with a parent's religious or moral beliefs, that parent has a right to completely opt their child out of receiving all of those things. So let that simmer for a second. Any health topic. We're here talking about the California what? Healthy Youth Act. Anyone want to guess, under California curriculum standards, what subject the California Healthy Youth Act falls under? Health. In other words, in California state law, you have a right to opt your child out of all education related to the California Healthy Youth Act. All of it. All of it. Now, one of my colleagues is going to be talking a little bit more about what this discusses, what's covered under that, and how you can effect that opt-out. And what is an opt-out? Because some of you may be saying, you keep using that word. Very, very simple. Classroom says, we're going to be teaching health or sex education. And then you as a parent just say, I want my child to be excused. So when that topic comes up, the teacher has to say, hey, Johnny, your mom and dad have asked you to be dismissed, so we're actually going to let you go to the study hall. You can work on other things. You can do another assignment there, but your parents have decided you're going to be dismissed. Now, some of us may be saying, boy, that sounds like a hard thing for a child to do, to be excluded that way. But what if it was not just Johnny, but Johnny and Susie and 15 of their classmates all being dismissed together? You see, this is one of those things that the more you as parents stand up together, not alone so that Johnny is feeling like, man, like, why am I the only one being dismissed? But where it's, I want to see the day it's the other way, where there's like the one kid left. Like, well, everybody except Johnny, your parents have decided to opt you out, so we're just going to talk to you, Johnny. That's the day I want to see. Because when that starts happening, what's going to happen? The schools are going to say, this is not even worth teaching. Why are we even doing this when no parent wants their child exposed to this? But it requires every single one of you exercising this right. Every single one of you filling out that form and submitting it. Every single one of you following up on it. Because this is how the change happens. Not letting one family be the sacrificial lamb, but every one of us together saying, no, we are all in this together and we are going to protect all of our kids against this. So exercise these rights. Too many people have fought, and too many legislators have taken a stand on this for us to step back and say, well, they're the professionals, they know what they're doing. No, they are not. You are the professional. God made you the professional of your child. And so exercise that right. Know what's best and exercise that right. I want to talk about another topic we've seen come up in the public school. This deals with confidential medical services. All of this is the idea that, again, this is terrible, but this is the law that California has passed, but has decided, well, we want children to be able to go and get confidential medical services, i.e. abortion and birth control. We're starting even to see with the gender identity issue of getting the hormones, the puberty blockers and things like that, and that those children have a right to do that without their parents ever knowing about it. What's really troubling is that this is now filtering into the schools, with California law saying a school can allow a child to go off campus, to leave campus during the school day and get these medical services, and we do not have to tell you as parents about that. Now, let me dispel a couple of things really quick. Number one, this is not a schools are required to do this. This is a schools may do this. Because a lot of schools are saying, oh, we are required to dismiss students and not let you as parents know. That is false. That is not what the law says. And in fact, we found a letter from the original sponsor of this bill back in the 80s or 90s, making very clear, no, that is not the intent. The intent is not that schools are required to dismiss students. Merely, if they choose to dismiss students, they must let parents know that their child may be dismissed without their permission. Does that make sense? Okay. So I wanted to dispel that myth. But I also, this whole idea of like, oh, well, we as the school get to decide when they're going off campus and what gets disclosed to parents. Remember, even accepting their view that there's this sort of barrier once the child enters the school, they're not in the school anymore. All of you as parents know, how many permission slips do you have to sign for your child to go to the field trip to the zoo? It's like, yes, they can eat this food, and yes, they can ride with this person. It's like a dozen permission slips to go to the school or to go to the zoo. And yet, the whole idea of, but when they want to go get an abortion, You don't even have the right to know. We're not even going to give you a courtesy call to say, by the way, your child was off campus. And even as a practical matter, I'm thinking, you let a child off campus and something happens? Oh my goodness. Or even just the very fact of, let's say there's a family emergency and you're calling the school saying, hey, something just happened, the father had a heart attack. Where's Susie at? We can't tell you that. We actually don't know where she's at. I'm sorry, I dropped my child off this morning and you don't know where my child is at right now? But this is the sort of idea that they're trying to promote. This is another area where this local control matters. And what we need is parents to start showing up at school boards and saying, hey, just because the law says you can excuse students without us knowing doesn't mean you should. And so one of the things we're going to talk about today is what type of policy can you help enact to ensure that whenever your child steps foot off campus, you know where they're going, when they're going, who they're going with, so that you as a parent have the right to know what's going on, that notification, and decide whether or not you as a parent want that to happen. But we've got to get together and help get these laws enacted at the local level. All right, so with my last few minutes here, I want to transition. I know we've been talking a lot about parent rights, right? Sort of we want to get more parent involvement in the public school. We want to know what's being taught. We want the opportunity to take our kids out of curriculum that we object to. We want to know when our child is going off campus and be able to decide if we want them to go off campus without our permission and things like that. But I want to turn to a different way that we can help protect our kids and also protect parental rights. And I want to talk a little bit about student rights at school as well. Because although there are these times where those courts put up that barrier and say, sorry parents, you've given up your right once your child went in, that child, as the Supreme Court has said, does not give up their constitutional rights when they walk into the schoolhouse gates. They wear them all day long. In fact, how I got started with ADF was defending these rights of kids wanting to share their faith at school or start a Bible club or all of these other things. And time again, we've had courts say, whether it's an 18-year-old high school kid or a 5-year-old kindergarten kid, they have constitutional rights that cannot be shed, that cannot be taken away when they enter into school. Let me talk about a few of those rights. Let's talk about the right to free speech. Now, we may think of this in the context of, the child's right to, speak up and have, religious views, religious opinions, and things like that. And that's absolutely right. Like I said, I've spent a lot of time fighting for the freedom of kids to share their faith, to include their faith in a school activity. We actually had a case in Los Angeles a few years ago. Brian Hickman, this young boy who they had a school talent show, and he was part of his church's sort of praise and worship team. And what he loved to do is they had the creative movement, the dance team, right, of doing the movements with the kids' church and, praise the Lord, all the people and all of that stuff. And he loved doing that. And so for a school talent show, he wanted to do the song, I forget what it was, Steve Feast's song, but sort of expressing his love for Jesus through dance. And he goes to the talent show auditions, and they say, hey, Brian, we really love what you're doing, but your song says Jesus too many times. We need you to pick something else. This was a week before the talent show, and Brian went home, and it was funny. His mom was like, well, yeah, Brian, maybe you ought to find another song. And Brian said, no, Mom, this is what I want to sing to. This is what I want to dance to. This is the song I love. We got involved, and a week later, Los Angeles Unified School District had to change its policies regarding talent shows, and Brian got to perform. But it took a courageous kid. And it's going to take you as parents to instill that courage in your kids. And it's a hard fight. I know it is. I sympathize with having my own kids and starting to have tough conversations about, hey, you may get laughed at because of what you believe. You may get mocked because of what you believe. But you got to stand firm. On these questions of free speech, we're starting to see it more and more with this issue of pronouns and the gender identity, where school announces, hey, we've now got, Johnny is now going to be known as Susie, and we want all of you to welcome Susie into our class, and you need to call Susie a she, and you need to do all of this stuff. And they're forcing kids to do this. What are they forcing them to do? They're forcing them to lie. Let me be blunt about it. They're forcing them to say something that is biologically, factually inaccurate. We're even seeing this with college professors being told that they have to use inaccurate pronouns. Let me be very clear. Your child cannot be forced to say an inaccurate pronoun or anything else that either is factually wrong or, more importantly, that violates your religious convictions and your family's religious convictions on these issues. I'm not saying bully a kid that's going through questions and confusion about their gender identity. To the contrary, that child needs love and support to help them embrace their God-given biological sex. But we should never compromise on speaking truth and not backing down 1 inch from the conviction of no matter how you may believe, God created you as a male or God created you as a female. And he has an incredible plan and purpose for your biological sex. There's a reason he created you that way, and we want to help you embrace that. And I can't say something to you that is false. I can't look you in the eye and say, you were created in the image of God as a male, but I'm going to call you as a she. Right? What are you doing? You're poking your finger in God and saying, God, you got it wrong with that one. We have to speak the truth, and we have to embolden our kids to say, look, be polite, be respectful, be loving, but don't back down 1 inch, and do not accept this idea that you have to speak something that is false and that violates our religious convictions about what it means to be male and female created in the image of God. So they've got the right to speak freely on these issues, to speak out, to be bold when it comes to these issues that are going on. They've got the right to exercise their religion. They've got the right to pray together with their classmates, whether it's during lunch or saying a prayer before test in the hallway with a friend, of gathering around the flagpole to pray for their school, forming a Bible club, another group that can help speak truth into the environments of their schools. So that although you as a parent may not be able to go in there and say, hey, let's talk about Jesus, let's talk about the Bible, your child can. And they can take the religious education that you have given them and go into that school and say, hey, let me tell you guys about Jesus Christ. Let me tell you about my Savior. Let me pray with you and walk you through to accepting him as your Lord and Savior. They can do that every single day, and they have an absolute right to do it, and there's nothing the school can do to stop the gospel from getting in the schools that way. But it requires courageous kids and courageous parents that are willing to stand with them and train them and embolden them to do this. Right to equal access. Basically what that means, if other students are allowed to do it, if other students are allowed to form a club and make announcements and have events and get funding, then your child has the same right to do those things. So if there is a, Planned Parenthood club on campus, then absolutely there's a right to have a pro-life club on campus. We've seen schools try and say, oh, that's a controversial topic and we don't want to get into that. Too bad. You're already teaching it. Students have that right to equal access, to be treated equally, especially as they're exercising their faith. And the last one I want to sort of wrap up with is the question of bodily privacy. And this is one that it's a big battle going on across the country. We know more and more schools are sort of adopting these, look, you go to the restroom, you go to the locker room, you go to the shower, whichever one you want to, however you identify, that is where you are welcome to go. There are consequences to this ideology. I had the opportunity to work with a mom. She's in the Midwest. She has a heart for kids in the foster care system. And so for years, she's welcomed children into her home. Various times she's had anywhere from 4 to 6 kids that she's been loving on and pouring Jesus into them and just helping these kids heal. A lot of these kids have experienced some pretty incredible trauma. A lot of sexual abuse, physical abuse. You can imagine it. One day she gets a call from the school, or actually I guess an email was sent out from the school saying, we're now adopting this policy that however a child identifies, that's where they're allowed to use all of these private facilities. So this mom calls the school and says, wait a second, let me get this right. So you're saying that if a boy thinks he's a girl, he's allowed to go into the girl's restroom. That's right. Locker room. That's right. So what you're saying is, for my daughters that have suffered sexual abuse, they could be walking out of a bathroom stall, what's supposed to be a safe, protective place for them, and come face to face with a boy. And you don't think that might be a little traumatic for them? And the school's response is, too bad. You as a parent don't have a right to control that. The mother then went on and said, well, wait a second. Every year, the sixth graders, and one of her daughters at that time was in sixth grade, we take a trip to D.C. You're telling me my daughter could be forced to share a room, a bed, with a biological boy on this trip? And the school's response, I kid you not, was, that's right. And furthermore, neither you nor your daughter would even have a right to know that that's a boy being put in the room with her, because it would violate the boy's right to privacy. Now, what's fascinating is the state in which this mom was based, part of their foster care laws, and this is pretty common, is that when you bring a child into your home, you cannot force them to share a room or usually even a bathroom with someone of the opposite sex, because they recognize these children may have suffered sexual abuse and they need a safe environment in which to heal. And so, no, you can't make them share a room with a boy. And yet, in her own home, the state says you must protect her privacy and her safety and her dignity. But then she sends them to school or on a trip to D.C., and it's, oh no, make her share a bathroom, a locker room, a shower, a bed with a boy. What impact does that have on a young girl that's trying to heal? These are the forgotten victims in all of this. That there are children that need protection. There are reasons we have separate facilities for guys and girls. It's to protect privacy, but it's also to ensure that these individuals that have gone through these tragic circumstances, that have come out of abusive homes, can heal, to feel safe, and to not feel like they're going to walk out of a stall and relive the trauma that they may have gone through years ago. Your child, regardless of whether it's a foster child, your own child, regardless of any life experience, though, has a constitutional right to have their privacy protected. The government cannot force you or your child to share these intimate spaces, these showers, these restrooms, these locker rooms with someone of the opposite sex. What can you do to protect that? A privacy accommodation. For every school that has adopted one of these policies, for every school that has said, you use whatever facility you want to, we want you as parents to start pushing back and say, fine, if that's going to be your policy, then we are requiring you to provide a private accommodation for our child. I want my son and my daughter to have a restroom that they can go to where they will never be forced to share these places with someone of the opposite sex. And schools must provide this. They cannot force your child to share a communal shower or locker room or whatever it is with someone of the opposite sex. But you've got to assert these rights. And again, I know that this is uncomfortable, and it's going to say, oh, but am I going to get called out? Are they going to call me a bigot and anti-transgender and all of this stuff? One, that's not the case. We're not trying to deprive something of these other kids. I want to protect a child struggling with gender identities, privacy, the exact same I want to protect my child's privacy. I think every single one of them deserves it. But what we're seeing is a one-way street, where one group gets their demands, and those that have other beliefs and those that have concerns about the impact of opening up showers, locker rooms, and restrooms to the opposite sex are silenced and called bigots, and I'm tired of dealing with it, and we have got to take a stand for those rights. So let me wrap up with this. I don't view this as even just purely a matter of rights and protecting our children and protecting our parental rights. There is eternal significance to these battles. And let me tell you one final story. We got to represent this family, the Ayers family. Katie Ayers was the daughter. The parents were very new Christians. In fact, they had lived a pretty rough lifestyle, drugs and partying and all of this stuff. And they had a daughter, and they had a sort of a come to Jesus moment that was very honest and saying, we can't keep doing this. So they left their home in Florida, moved to Pennsylvania to start a new life, and gotten plugged into a church, got very involved. Their daughter Katie, got very fired up, was part of the youth group. And part of what she wanted to do was to invite some of her kids, some of her classmates. So Katie had an invitation. They were having a church Christmas party. They're going to have games and activities and things like that. And Katie wanted to invite some of her classmates. So she came up with invitations and was taking them to school and putting them in her classmates' cubbies. Well, the teacher finds out about this and goes and removes all of those, calls Katie's parents and say, we saw Katie handing out this flyer Katie is not allowed to invite her friends to church. That's proselytizing. You can't proselytize at school. Now, as an aside, isn't that exactly what they're doing with all of this LGBT stuff, is proselytizing students? But you can't proselytize about Jesus. That's not allowed in school. Katie and her family call us. They say, look, we're new to this community. We don't want a lot of trouble, but we just feel this is wrong. We said, you're right, it is wrong. So we filed a lawsuit. The school dug in their heels. No proselytizing, you can't do it. Katie wins, and the court says, no, you cannot prohibit her from proselytizing. School still keeps fighting. We go to appeal. The appeal court rules for Katie as well. Gets this incredible opinion protecting her right to share her faith. But here's where the real impact is. A couple months after that, Katie handed out some more flyers, and one of those kids came to the church event. That kid accepted Christ. 2 weeks later, the child's coming, they see the parents walk in. Katie's parents run over to those other parents and say, hey, welcome to the church. We're glad to have you here. That family accepts Christ. We may think a flyer, we may think taking a stand on a privacy issue and opt-out, we may say, this just seems such a small thing. We don't know what one of these battles can have. You don't know that your one act of boldness could lead someone else to take a stand. You don't know that your one act of boldness could lead to someone else saying, wow, I've never heard the gospel put this way. We don't know that one act of courage that you as a parent do or that you as a child do can't lead another child, or a whole family, a whole community to come to Christ. So I say fight this battle not just for your rights as parents, not just for your child's rights, but for the eternal kingdom consequences that I believe God can accomplish when one person, when one community takes a stand on these issues. So my encouragement is to you to fight. We're going to fight with you in the courts. We're going to fight with you in the legislature. We're going to fight with you at local school boards. But we need you to fight.